Hafere and Mananasi Zu'us Todusamsu, thank you for being here today. The Guam Trademark Commission will now be called to order. For the record, in accordance with the open government law, meeting notices were given to all Commission senatorial members, stakeholders, and all main media broadcasting outlets. The first notice was sent out on Wednesday, June 19th, 2019, and the second notice went out on Monday, June 24th, 2019. Today is Wednesday, June 26th, 2019, and the time is now 9:14. We have 1, 2, 3, I guess I should have counted ahead of time, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Great. We have 9 members present today, which represents a quorum. Today's meeting is the Commission's second meeting, and there are several new faces that we are so pleased to have. I look around, and it's such a good composition of board members. We have people representing agencies that are very relevant, and then also we have people that are just very knowledgeable about their agency and have been a part of this type of work for a very long time. So we have an excellent set of people that are going to be contributing to the work we're doing. The committee will be hosting today's and all future meetings of the Commission. All meetings will be held at the Guam Congress Building. The Guam Trademark Commission is required to meet once a month, and regular monthly meetings will be convened at the availability of this public hearing room. Perhaps after September, when the legislature completes the fiscal year 2020 budget, we may be able to work amongst ourselves to establish a set and routine schedule. For introductory purposes, I ask that you introduce yourselves to the Commission and the agency or entity that you represent. So I'll go ahead and begin on my left.
Jackie Babos from the Guam Council in the Arts and Humanities Agency, CAHA.
Anne-Marie Arceo, President, Department of Chamorro Affairs.
Frank Rabon, Master of Chamorro Dance, Pare Pobetsani Tautauta, Inc.
And I believe, are you also representing CAHA today?
Yes, as a board member.
As a board member, Paulik.
Matthew Baza from the Guam Economic Development Authority.
Rita Nauta, Managing Director at Guampedia and the official designee for Speaker Munya Barnes' office.
Michael Lunchik with the Department of Revenue and Taxation.
I'm Chris Lezama with the Guam Visitors Bureau.
Albert Paris, the Department of Revenue and Taxation.
Maulik. And we may have some other members joining us a little bit later as well. So an excellent grouping today. Again, thank you very much for being here. I want to bring to your attention the materials provided to you today. So of the many things that we're going to be looking over in our time together, we have for today a copy of the Guam Trademark Commission Enabling Law. This document has been highlighted in key areas that will help our discussion in today's meetings. A copy also of the Guam Trademark Commission Committee Report. The minutes of the May 6th meeting is transcribed verbatim within the committee report. A committee report will be also produced for today's meeting and every future Guam Trademark Commission meeting. As required by law, the committee report was transmitted and filed with the governor and the legislature, and an audio recording of the May 6th commission meeting was also filed with the Office of the Public Auditor. A listing of all pertinent laws and Department of Revenue and Taxation trademark forms is included within the report. So, these documents are included within the committee report and will be useful references for this commission. In reconvening this commission, my office could not locate records of the work previously accomplished by the commission. In moving forward, the commission will record all of its meetings, so that our work and our accomplishments can be referenced in the future and built upon. We are now on item 2A of the agenda. Before we continue, I want to ask those commissioners, especially those who have been appointed to represent their agency heads, to please fill out the commissioner enrollment form. So you can begin on that form, and then just by the end of the meeting or shortly after the meeting, if you could submit those. Commissioners and alternates that fill out an enrollment form at the May 6th Guam Trademark Commission meeting are not required to fill it out again. The enrollment form is necessary for the commission to contact physically or electronically any commissioner or their alternates so that everyone stays well informed of the activities and schedule, or to allow for the delivery of information from the commission. Again, I want to emphasize that it is important that the commissioners from each agency appoint dependable and knowledgeable alternates. The alternates are expected to be consistent in their attendance. We have a lot of ground to cover, and additionally, you each represent an agency or an entity, and you may be deliberating or making decisions through this commission on matters that might affect or impact your organization or entity. So that consistency is important. For item 2B on the agenda, just make sure I'm going in order here. Yes. For item 2B of the agenda, the Guam Trademark Commission law references the Maori program of New Zealand as a model that the Commission could review while crafting the Guam Cultural Trademark Act. As the Commission moves forward, we will review that model. What we did last time is we got to watch a video. It's available online. We can definitely send you the link if you were not able to watch it last time. And you can watch it at your leisure to catch up, but also maybe to reference again. I've been finding that rereading this information, because there is such a large amount of information, has been very helpful in helping me really understand all the issues as we're going through them. As the Commission moves forward, we will review that model as well as others that are laws or programs that are available and already developed, and analyze those for their methodology and their applicability towards promoting and licensing both the people of Guam's trademark, which is one of our goals, and then the other for developing and licensing the Chamorro Cultural Arts trademark for those items that are manufactured or produced on Guam. We are now on item 2B of the agenda. Okay, I had mentioned that already. So please reference the Guam Trademark Commission enabling law provided to you specifically. It has sections 14105B, and there are items 1, 7, 8, and 9 that we talked about in the last meeting. However, since we are gathering again together today, I wanted to go over a couple of things. So maybe if we look together at the enabling law, we can just pull out a couple of main points. So in that first section, section 14102, it calls for developing 2 different trademark acts. The first one is going to be the Guam Trademark and Intellectual Property Rights Act. That one is more general. It's for the people of Guam. And then the second one is the Guam Cultural Arts Trademark Act, and that one's going to be more specific. to the Chamorro people, depending how we all decide to move forward. In that Enabling Act, it also lists the commissioners so that you can see all of the entities that are participating. We have a good majority of us here, so that's readily understood. The other part I just wanted to bring up as something for us to be keeping in mind. We mentioned it just briefly last time, but I want to bring it to our attention today. When we're talking about that Chamorro Cultural Arts Trademark Act, the way that our legislation is written is it's saying that it is specifically for the arts manufactured or produced on Guam. But as we all know, there are Chamorros, of course, in the Northern Mariana Islands. There are Chamorros in the mainland, in other territories of the US, and of course, worldwide. So I think that will be something important for us to be thinking about, and maybe when the AG's office is present, they are going to be sending a representative, and they are hopefully going to be providing a presentation next month. We can be asking them some of those questions about how do we distinguish, or is there a way to broaden that ability and to give us some guidance in that area. The other point that I wanted to mention is how work like this really opens up our minds. So certainly, as I've been going through our community over the last month, I've really been thinking about, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, but I've really been thinking about some of the work that we're going to be working on. Looking at the names, the Chamorro language usage, the visuals of products, even just the shapes, and weighing out what their potential is for our sort of work, whether they belong to the Chamorro people as a whole, as part of their sacred heritage, and so forth. And so I think that'll be something that we all do as we go around, is really start to notice that part of our environment around us and help us think through some of those nuances that are going to be part of our work. And just to point out in the enabling legislation that we have 9 people here today. The quorum is a simple majority, so it's 6. And then when we vote on items as spelled out, it would be a vote of 4 to be able to move things along. Or more, depending upon how many are here to vote, but just to make some of that clear. So since we are in Section 2B, we had talked with Gita, that being Mr. Matt Vaza, last month, about looking into some of the items in the enabling legislation 1, 7, 8, and 9. And we had said that we would be interested in hearing some of their thoughts and research into processes. So if we look in our enabling legislation, highlighted for you there are 1, 7, 8, and 9. And it might have been a large amount of homework to assign. So if you, Matt, could provide us some feedback and let us know how far you've been able to get in that regard, and we can hear a little bit about the processes for certifying artists or organizations or vendors that you've been able to find out.
Good morning, and good morning to the committee. After the meeting, we sort of went back and we looked at what do we currently do now with the Guam product sale, because that is our first, I think it's our easiest method of comparison. And when you look at the Guam product sale, there's parameters built into the law as to what will make an item applicable to say it's made in Guam. So you're looking at the landed value of inputs from off-island versus the current wholesale price or the retail price of the item. Because as what I'm seeing here, based on this section B of section B of 14105, we're looking at, it seems that we're looking at commercial products, because it says, you know, produced cultural arts manufactured or produced on Guam. So the Guam product seal doesn't differentiate from art, doesn't differentiate from cookies or any of that nature. It's just, if someone wants to say something's made in Guam, there needs to be no more than 50% of the value can be added from something outside of Guam, and there needs to be a substantial transformation. Those metrics probably won't apply to this, because now we're talking about art and cultural heritage, and absent knowing exactly what we want to trademark or what the parameters are going to be, it's going to be a little bit difficult to pin that down. So based on how we vet manufacturers is we look at the value of the product, what's added in Guam, what inputs are brought in from off-island, and whether or not a substantial transformation occurs. There's a whole process, and I guess we can go into the whole process in the next few months when you want Gita to present. There's a whole inspection process and all of that kind of stuff. And of course, they need a valid Guam business license. Whether or not we're going to require each person under this Guam trademark to have a valid Guam business license, these are all questions that kind of popped up when we had our little powwow in the office. With regards to art organizations, for vendors that use the trademark, right now, under the Guam Product Seal law, like I said, we always reference back to that because that's what we know. There's no like requirement that let's say a retail store that's going to carry a made in Guam product, they need to come in and fill out a form and say, we want to carry Guam products, can you certify us? None of that currently exists. There are fines and there are violations in law that say so there's a fine for the manufacturer. So if a manufacturer says made in Guam without a valid Guam product seal, or if a product says made in Guam that isn't made in Guam, there's fines for that. And there are currently fines for a store or a retailer who puts a product or advertises a product as made in Guam where it doesn't have a seal or it is in fact not made in Guam. So what we do on our end is we try our best to let the vendors, especially the ones that try to carry a lot of made in Guam products, that if they're saying their product's made in Guam, please make sure it has a copy of the seal. And even if it does have a copy of the seal, please, you can always ask for a copy of the permit that Gita issues to the manufacturer. So that is sort of the process we go through. It's mainly an informational process. I am not sure how we would say for store A, in order to carry a trademarked art made in Guam, that they need to do some sort of process. It might be something as simple as making sure that all the retailers or the vendors or art organizations know that if they're going to say this carries a trademark, please get a copy of the document that says they're allowed to use the trademark. So that's sort of where we are right now. We're still kind of thinking about it, and sort of once we figure out what the commission figures out what we want to trademark, the procedures for that, maybe the parameters of what will be required would flow from that. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Seduas Maasi for that. And it sounds like Gita sat down and very thoughtfully went over this, and we really appreciate that. You mentioned several things that I think are really important for us to be thinking about. Are we specifically dealing with commercial products? That will be important for us to think about. And also you mentioned with the Guam Product Seal, there is that element of the 50% or more added value on Guam. And I think that can come into, even if we're talking about commercial items for artists, because there are prints that can be made off of an original art piece, there are t-shirts that can be made off of an original painting. So I think those are all very good points that you brought up, and they will be definitely things that we need to consider. And in that idea of if there is intellectual property that is created here through, let's say, a painting, and that becomes something that's printed on a t-shirt, is that substantial transformation still needed on Guam? Is that completely up to the artist to have that manufactured elsewhere? Those will be things I think that are important, whether they need a business license if we are dealing with commercial products, or whether we are out to safeguard their intellectual property, whether they are a licensed person or not, and whether they are creating these for commercial use or not. Let's say if somebody painted a mural, as we're seeing them go up around our island, is that something that they could trademark without necessarily commercializing it, but it's an original art piece? So there may be items like that. And certainly I think with Chamorro heritage, pottery designs, traditional medicines, dance movements, these may be things that the Chamorro people want to have some property rights over. And then we would have to be thinking about how do Chamorros access this and be able to use it in a variety of ways, because it's not necessarily to limit, I think, that we're looking at, it's just to safeguard in a variety of ways. Another thought that came to mind is I wanted to ask you how the enforcement is for the Guam Product Seal. And I think that's something that we'll need to think about as well in developing for the Trademark Acts, is how are we going to enforce this? Because I think that ends up being maybe the trickier, more difficult part of all of this, is how to enforce it. Ideally, I'd like to figure out ways, now that's may not go into the legislation, but I'd like to figure out ways to incentivize. And I know the Guam Product Seal has worked at incentivization as well. But if you could speak a little bit about the enforcement and maybe some incentivization.
Well, enforcement for the Guam Product Seal, and I think because Guam Product Seal deals with manufacturers of products, so it's purely meant for people who are dealing in a commercial manner. So they need to come in every year and get the permit reissued, just like a Guam business license. And the rules and regulations are very clear that any Guam Product Seal holder that doesn't currently have a valid business license cannot obtain a seal. So it's an annual enforcement of the manufacturer that they need to come in every year, renew it, and then they let us know whether or not we're doing the exact same thing we did the year before. And if they're doing the exact same thing they did the year before, we can renew it. But if they said, oh, we're adding a product, or we're adding a new product that's totally outside of what we did before, it would warrant a reinspection or a revisit to them. And then depending on how that is approved, if that's approved, they'll get a seal for everything, or stuff like that. They're also supposed to let us know if they're going to stop making a product, or if the business is going to close, so that we know that if there's a product on the shelf 5 years later that claims to be their product, that's a red flag. Like I said, with the vendors, with the stores, or with the retailers that sell the products, that one I think is mainly at this point more of an information type thing, where we let them know, hey, just be aware, if you carry a product that has a seal that's not made in Guam, you're liable for a fine. And they're supposed to pull the product from the shelves, they themselves, the vendor, lest they be fined. Because usually what happens is, more often than not, what happens is either a GIDE employee goes out there and sees something and they're like a little bit, or someone from the public that's aware of the program calls up and says, I went to the store and I saw this product, does it have a Guam Product Seal? 9 times out of 10 it does, and we just say, oh yes, they do. Or on those off cases, then we'll say, okay, thank you for letting us know. We'll try to inform the vendor that the product does not carry a valid permit at this time, and they really should pull the product from their shelves. Because the last thing we want to do is impose a fine on a vendor who's just trying to sell a product. They're not too aware of the program. So I'm assuming with this trademark, when we get to that point, it's going to be a lot of education, a lot of awareness that if something's going to carry that trademark, it needs to have some sort of document. You should ask for a document detailing that. That may be something you want to put in, that whoever has a trademark needs to be able to readily produce it at any time if asked by someone. Kind of like how a business license needs to be posted on a venue. And then getting back to that earlier point you made about if someone's going to make an original work of art and trademark it and then put it on a shirt, those are a lot of questions that come up ourselves. And in reviewing the Guam Product Sale rules and regs from way back, I think this is when Department of Commerce still had it, there's already an exemption in the law that's in the rules and regs that says original works of art don't need to have the Guam Product Sale unless they want to explicitly advertise that it's produced on Guam. If they want to explicitly advertise that I am Matt Baza and I make this art and this art is made in Guam, they will need to get a seal. But if they're not going to, and if an original work of art and they don't want to explicitly state this is produced in Guam, they don't need one. So that's sort of where it is with art on the Guam Product Seal right now. Also, like companies with less than $5,000 in gross sales and a bunch of other stuff. But with regards to art, that's where it is right now. So.
Siduas Maasi for that. You brought up several more excellent points that we need to write into, or at least be keeping at the forefront of our thinking, that there's going to need to be an extensive awareness and educational program that goes along with this, especially if we want it to be something that's safeguarding, something that's doing something positive and not just penalizing. We want to be doing those positive things for our community, and so I think that's a really good way to go about it. And you brought up issues like perhaps making sure that there's documentation, maybe there's some sort of a symbol that could be associated, akin to the Guam Product Seal, which made me come up with a question. With the Guam Product Seal, does it always need to be on that product, or is it okay if they've licensed through the Guam Product Seal program, if they've put something out there? Because sometimes I haven't been sure if they're part of the Guam Product Seal program, and so I haven't bought it, even though I might have really wanted to buy it. So do they need to have that seal on there, or is that an option for them?
I believe the law is clear that if they want to say made in Guam, it needs to have the seal somewhere on the product. It doesn't state that it needs to be like in the front or the most conspicuous area, but it does need to be on the product.
Okay, so it must be visible in some sense, and so that helps give me guidelines there. And it was also good to hear about if they stop making a product or they close down their shop, that they should notify you, and those things are important to be thinking about this over the long term when somebody has a trademark. How long will that be for? Does there need to be any renewal process? Things like that. Do they need to document if they no longer are interested in maintaining that, or something along those lines? So thank you for all of those excellent points. And as you mentioned, it's important to be hearing about what the parameters are. And that's where the next assignment that we had for CAHA really comes in. And I think with the work that CAHA is doing, and that's collecting the list of the different types of arts that we have, both tangible and intangible, that is something that should be ongoing. I don't think that's something that can be done quickly in a month. I think it needs to have a lot of thought. We need to hear from community members from different sectors. Like just recently, I had somebody from the fishing community reach out to me, and I hadn't necessarily thought about all of those art forms in detail. So I think it gives the community the opportunity to reach out to any one of us to share some of their art forms, and for us to just be continuing to develop that list as time goes on, so that we're constantly making it as comprehensive as possible. The last item I wanted to mention that Matt brought up was for the continued work of this task force. You know, in my mind, I was thinking, okay, once we get those acts together, it's like we're done. But I think with some of the issues that come up from time to time in a program, that the work of the task force might be continuing thereafter to be able to address things that come up as society changes or as laws change and so forth. So again, thank you for bringing that up, Matt. And then I'll go ahead and...
Senator
Yes.
Dispenza, if I may.
Yes.
I just wanted to add that currently in my experience of the last 6 months of running the Chamorro Village, that this part of, and I know in the future there's plans for us to work very closely with Gita, and I'm really appreciating that right now because there's a sense, and I want to stress how important it is that this commission really create clear guidelines and encourage that in the direction we're going, that when we say it, maybe almost to the point of being a clearinghouse almost for everything that we say is made on Guam, and to really establish what the definition of local means, because there seems to be, and not that we want to not be inclusive of everybody on our island being that we're a melting pot, but Chamorro Village, for example, is one of the few places where we can declare, our identity and to encourage our nation building and encourage our, promotion of our language and culture. However, there's some, thoughts and perspectives that might be discriminatory, and so I think our commission can really, really make clear in establishing going forward how this will, encourage that local is tomorrow. I mean, we're the indigenous people of this island, and if we were elsewhere and, if Japan or Korea wanted to promote their, being Korean or being Japanese, I wouldn't feel that that's discriminatory against me being a visitor or being a part of if I ever moved over there, because they're that place. Now, I just wanted to share that those are some areas that are very gray, or, people are using that to move away from what promoting local is. And so what is that? And I think we really need to define that. So I'm running into that. There's a lot of gray areas, and so Matt, I'm really appreciating the Guam Product Still program, because there's a lot of gray areas in the Chamorro Village, for example, in the policy. It's saying that, whatever they sell in the stores have to be a certain percentage, right? 85% made on Guam or being local. Now, what does that mean exactly? It doesn't have any details, right? Guam seal and the EFIT wood or whatever that kind of wood is could be made in Bali and brought here and say it's, Guam, right? Because it has that kind of marketing that it's a Guam seal, it's a latte stone. But to what degree, we need to determine to what degree do we have those resources, and that they need to resource somewhere else. So I know it's a very gray area that we really need to discuss and work out, but I think this is where maybe those things can be clarified and they can be encouraged, it can be strengthened in that direction. So I just wanted to share, to add on to that, how important it is because of my experience with what's going on at the village. And so it's very hard for me to mandate or to give direction in that when everybody's, the language and the policy is so vague that local could mean not tomorrow. It could mean that, you're raised on Guam and you're local. So, and that's okay outside of it, but in places where we do have the opportunity to promote our indigeneity and our tomorrowness, that we need to establish those, boundaries. Sidus Masi.
Sidus Masi for that. And I think some of what you're referring to is the enabling legislation or the guidelines and vision for the Chamorro Village, that it is already spelled out, and it's been spelled out perhaps from the very beginning, so over the many years. But unless we revisit these things, sometimes those things can become lost or muddled. And it sounds like some clarity could be brought to that anyway, right? And so that's definitely something that we as a body, but then also as I continue to work with you, that we could be providing more clarity on. And I think it does get back to that, the importance of different programs and the type of awareness that they create. I think it's true that sometimes it can be lost. We have such a mixed demographic community right now. And I think that for the most part that we're all with good intentions, but it can be lost that it's an indigenous homeland, and that with indigenous peoples there are certain rights that the United Nations has declared and other important considerations that we should all be aware of and all figure into these sort of things. And as you mentioned, it's not to be exclusionary, it's to recognize those rights alongside the larger community's rights. So, yes.
Just to clarify some of the stuff that Anne-Marie and Matthew was talking about, I used to handle the Guam products too back then. And just for clarity, it's all about identity. It's all about trying to ensure that the product that you have is actually a locally manufactured product. However, because there's some items that are already distinct, they're going out of like you're talking about the e-fit and stuff like that. And the reason why it was 50 plus is because you still want to manufacture your product. And to do so, if you have limited resources, of course you can get it somewhere. That's not to say it's not a locally made product. It's just that you're kind of like borrowing it from another place, but still making it a Guam product still item, because it has the authenticity of saying, hey, if it was made here in Guam, I mean, it's grown here in Guam, we turn around and we make plaques out of the e-fit and stuff like that. So that bears the percentage of saying it can bear the Guam product seal labeling. At one point in time, there was a hearing a while back. I don't recall what legislative session it was, where at one point, because we went out and we actually did an inspection prior to us handing it over to Gita, and it was to identify whether or not the product was actually a locally made product. And so what we did was we did the inspection, and only to find out that, yeah, portions of it was made, and we were told to have them take the products down. I agree with Matt when he said our intent is not to find the individual, but give them clarity as to what is truly a Guam product seal item and what is not. And if it's not, don't deceive the public by saying it is. Let's go out there and let's represent the product as a true Guam product item. And so with that, we were able to come up with an idea that the stores were going to have a labeling, and they're saying in their, like maybe the front entrance of their door, where they're going to say, we support the Guam product seal. Mm-hmm. I don't know whatever became of that, but that's something maybe that you may want to bring out.
Senator, may I clarify or ask a question?
Yeah.
Senator, may I have your permission to clarify on a question? So Matt, on the Guam product seal, now this conversation brings to mind, because this is what I'm facing now. Mm-hmm. When you say Guam product seal made here on Guam, does that mean you're promoting tomorrow in that product? Does it necessarily mean that, or can I make and produce a Korean doll here on Guam, and as long as it's Korean and I'm sewing the clothes and I'm making it, does that mean made on Guam, or does the Guam product seal stand by promoting tomorrow? I'm just clarifying. I just wanted to clarify the question.
You want to?
Well, I mean, Agita's perspective right now is the law just talks about, if it just says a product is to be manufactured in Guam. It doesn't stipulate that it needs to be a Chamorro product or a local Guam product. It just says a product.
Yeah.
So it's really just a way to ensure that if someone's going to make something in Guam and market it as such, whatever item it may be, that it meets the minimum threshold of qualifying as made in Guam. So that is where it is. And that's why I think in the last meeting I sort of mentioned that this this new seal may supplement the Guam product seal, not replace. Because if someone's going to say, I am going to produce this local Chamorro heritage product, whatever it may be, and I also want to say that it's made in Guam, it could be coming to the point where we could say, okay, if you're going to, we can maybe change the application form to say, are you claiming that it is a product of true Chamorro heritage? Yes. If so, provide a copy of your trademark or whatever this comes out, whatever comes out of this prior to doing that. That's why a lot of times too, we always tell people, because the Guam seal itself is something that it's supposed to have some form of control over it, and they're supposed to get permission before they use the Guam seal on a commercial product. It'll be similar to that sort of setup, because the Guam product seal is not designed strictly for culture. We love it when the item is cultural in nature. That's our favorite item or favorite inspection to make, but it's not required.
If I may, Senator, also, the actual intent really when the law was made was to encourage local manufacturing. So in doing so, it doesn't really per se limit, but it would be ideal, of course, if you want to manufacture locally made products. That's really truly the intent, is to, one, promote a local manufacturing, because it stimulates the economy, for one thing. Secondly, it's to get these creative minds, these young entrepreneurs to create something that can be a showcase for the world to see and say, hey, it's locally made. Although it may be, like you say, Anne-Marie, a Korean doll, but all the elements are actually items that were brought out here in Guam, like the tree that they may want to carve out of Ifu, and then put a Korean setting to it, but it is locally made. And again, it was the intention of that Guam product seal is to, yes, let's showcase it that it was locally made, but it was also to encourage more local manufacturers to establish a company, or to establish a manufacturing company, so that, one, it can employ, it can stimulate the economy, and it promotes the island.
And I support all of that.
Yeah.
I just, maybe the thought that Matt brought, that it'll supplement, this other seal.
Right.
Or Guam product seal policy or procedure and process will promote really local, right?
Yeah.
And so we can have that on top of that, because that's all. I mean, I agree with the promotion of art, the promotion of economy and creativity.
Maybe that's why if they have that separation of maybe identifying and say, yes, this is manufactured, although it's a Japanese doll or whatever, and then on this side is a locally manufactured, maybe a Chamorro doll, then that's something that maybe can be drafted and added into this committee as a body to say, let's distinguish. Maybe we can categorize it, item 1, 2, or 3. I don't know, but how do we, like you say, how do we distinguish, and really how do we determine whether or not we limit it only to just local items? Although, like I said, it will be ideal, but it's to encourage manufacturing.
Maulik. And one of the things, I have had some discussions with the Guam Product Seal folk at GITA, and also under the Lieutenant Governor, he is the chair of the Guam Product Seal Task Force. And so in some of those discussions, we've looked at the idea of perhaps having tiers, where there might be different, as you're talking about, Mike, some different categories there. And so that could be something that the task force looks at, some that are artistic, some that are Chamorro indigenous, some that are food-oriented. And I had also suggested some categories that are very community-oriented, that perhaps some of the women's co-op organizations or some of the different sort of programs in need as people are developing crafts to try to get themselves into a sustainable livelihood, that those might be categories that the Guam Product Seal, but then also for us as well, do we need to spell out the different types of categories that can apply to these two different trademarks that we're working on. I really like the idea of being able to have into the work that we do the ability for stores to provide some sort of labeling that you were mentioning, Mike, so that people can know from the forefront that as they're entering the store, this is a store that's really supporting local in a variety of ways. And I just think that this work is so important right now because, as you guys have mentioned, we have a lot of creative entrepreneurs right now. We are seeing them at fairs and in our different shops. They're continually expanding. And so I think that's such a good movement for us to all be seeing. Last meeting, I had stumbled across some of my words and it came out instead of entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs. So we have a lot of entrepreneurs as well as others that are out there from things like Chamorro chip cookies and so forth that are really stimulating our economy. We know we need to diversify. So I think that this can be part of that diversification and building up of our economy, the work that we're doing. If there's no other discussion, then please feel free at any time to be adding in a comment or raising an issue or a question. But we can go ahead and move on to Kaha and be hearing about the masters that have been listed thus far and maybe other types of cultural arts that they've been able to list for us.
Thank you, Senator. As requested, here is a listing of all the Kaha Masters awards that have been awarded. In 1996, Kaha initiated a program to honor individuals who have dedicated their life to the perpetuation and promotion of a tradition or an art form. Since the inception of the program in 2010, the Guam Masters Award was passed. So with the enactment of that law, it put more teeth to the award, more credibility. And what it is there was a actual process of selecting these masters based on years of experience, advocacy, how active they are in the community, and so forth. So as of right now, the Kaha board is looking to amend that law to strengthen that law as well. And maybe Master Frank Rabon can speak to that because he's on the Kaha board and he's also chairing that specific movement. But these awards were given to people who practice maybe carving or dance or blacksmithing and so forth. I would think that in essence for maybe authenticity, maybe the Department of Chamorro Affairs should have a say in that, as they are the lead in anything that is Chamorro. So we could probably have discussion more on that with the Department of Chamorro Affairs. But you do have a listing there, and out of the over 60 masters that are listed, maybe we only have 12% or less than 10% of them that are alive today. So we'd like to see the continuation of these art forms in our community.
Sutus Masi for the listing, and it is very good to go through. We can see quite a range in here between being a pandanus leaf weaver, a master carver of Ifut wood, to a master tupadot, I think is how it would be pronounced, a sling maker. So I think this will give us some very good material to be looking over. And as I mentioned, I think we should just be, each one of us, as is feasible, be listening to the community or thinking in our own minds what art forms we can be adding to this. So I think this creates a nice foundation that we can definitely be building upon as time goes on. The other person who was going to be contributing for was Dr. Lara Sauder, and she's off island right now. We were hoping to teleconference with her, but that wasn't possible. But she will I'm sure, still be continuing to work on her listing as well of some of the intangible art forms that we can be adding to this, as well as other art forms as she knows them or works on developing that list as well. So Sijus Masi Kaha for that. And did anybody at this time have anything they wanted to add, or maybe take this list and think about it and see if they have anything to add for next time?
Yeah, just going through the listing, it's kind of scarce because if you notice it, a lot of these people are deceased. That's why it's very important that we as a committee, need to try to improve what we have so limited of now. And like I said, even with the Guam Products Seal and the trademark, I think we all go hand in hand, and let's try to establish a much stern committee so that we can start educating and start promoting what will soon be lost. Because I'm just looking at the list and I see a lot of deceased, and if we can get new masters to come back out, and then let's add them on the product list and also on the trademark, that would be very ideal.
I believe that CAHA is in the middle of revamping the master's program, and Frank sits on the board of CAHA and is kind of leading that committee to do that, because the other challenge we have is in all these different areas of art, the apprenticeship. There needs to be a very strong apprenticeship program that comes with this master, as Frank models in having predecessors after them, and not wait until somebody's deceased to say, okay, we need to find someone else. But from that pool of the apprentices, that someday one of those will become the masters. Yeah, Caesar's Masi.
I think it really provides a sense of pride for the community to see the breadth of the indigenous knowledge and skills that are a strong basis of, or a strong foundation of what exists. And we know that there's so much more out there, but in looking through these 63 masters, I think that it really provides that sense of pride, of understanding, and that the more that people understand the breadth of what has existed and we are working to make sure continues to exist, is incredibly important for the community. So with that, if there's no further discussion, we'll go to item 2C on the agenda. It mentions document listing. So we had one handout. There was the handout of the committee report, and its associated documents, but then there's also the handout, it's in two parts, about the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. There's one from 1935, and I believe one from, I think it's just providing more detail to that act. But that is also referenced as something to be working with. And so we won't be talking about it today, but I wanted to hand it out because at the next gathering, I wanted to invite the AG's office to go over, let me make sure that I reference it correctly, to go over this act, to provide an overview, but then also to be providing an overview of one of the other readings that's in our packets. So let me see if I can come up with that. That would be, I think, the Guam Trademark Commission Act. So with those two, I think it'd be very good to get some legal understanding of what is provided there. It helps us understand what's already in place so that we know it's very allowable for us to be building upon those acts. And we can see, because maybe there's concern out there that for Indigenous peoples, how can a government create a program such as this to safeguard their cultural arts and their intellectual property? But we see that as early as 1935, the U.S. has done this for the Indigenous peoples of North America, those Native Americans living in the United States. So I think that's going to be very useful for us to know that this has been successful within the United States, and to be getting some guidance through it. And I think what's going to be good about this format of being able to have these people come and provide presentations is we will be able to ask any question that will be helpful for us to consider. We will be able to ask for an understanding of the strengths, perhaps the weaknesses. This has been around for a long time, this Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1935. And so I'm sure that there's been a lot of writing and discussion about its strengths and its weaknesses. But those are things that we can be building upon, understanding the gaps. Having these presenters here who are experts in their fields will be allowing us those opportunities to hear all of that and ask anything that we want to. So with that, there also is that listing of the pertinent laws that has been handed out. It was provided to the Commission at the May 6th meeting. This listing is also included within the committee report. We're trying to make it super available. And the documents that are listed are also included, as I mentioned, within the committee report. Those documents will be frequently referenced as the Commission moves forward in crafting the Guam Trademark and Intellectual Property Act, but also the Guam Cultural Trademark Act. The Guam Trademark Commission Act provides that the Commission is creating those two trademarks, and that, as we mentioned before, that we're going to look at the Maori program and other programs as model laws and acts and programs to be building on. And again, just highlighting that it's important that this Trademark Commission is composed of members from a wide range of agencies and interests throughout the community to really try to be as thoughtful as possible as we move forward. Let's go ahead, if there's no other discussion, let's go ahead and move to item 3, new business on the agenda. So for new business, if I can, I'd like to ask Kaha to be developing definitions for the art forms as we move along.
Yes, I can go ahead and do that, Senator.
And some of these may already be listed, or defined, and we can then additionally be adding to those already existing definitions as we move forward. So thank you for that, Sitsus Maasi, Jackie. The last item that I have for today is the discussion about the applicability of the 4 subcommittees. So I think when this was first envisioned, they were trying to think of the work that we're doing as comprehensively as possible. And they broke it up into 4 subcommittees: visual arts, performing arts, literary arts, and demonstrations and exhibitions. This is, I think, typically how the Festival of Pacific Arts is divided up into disciplines. But I'd like us to consider whether that's the most useful way forward, or if we'd like to explore some other types of subcommittees. I was thinking a couple of possibilities we could look at for subcommittees is there could be maybe one subcommittee that's looking at that first trademark, the one that is for the general population, and it has that broader applicability. It's meant to mirror what the US has for trademark and intellectual property rights. Then the second subcommittee could be the one that is focusing specifically on the Chamorro cultural arts trademark. So that could be one way that we do it. Another one could be, well, I wrote myself a note and then now I'm not sure what it means. It says a subcommittee where subcommittees where we all are looking at one together and doing this sort of chronologically. Let's look at the general all together, and then we could have subcommittees that then look at the second trademark all together. So any thoughts out there as to how we should be forming some subcommittees?
Thank you, Senator. You were right when you had mentioned that at the time when the commission was formed, it was because of the FESPAC that just happened recently, I believe in 2016. I sat in several of the sessions with then Speaker Wampat, and the main intent was to protect the integrity of our Chamorro culture and the arts. And so the commission was then formed for that purpose. To say to maybe combine both of them, I think they work differently in how it's perceived, because with the intellectual property, most of the stuff that I do when I record IPs are things of either tangible items that let's say, for example, if you're a local individual that is into entrepreneurship, and then you want to create products of various kinds, and then you want to label those products, then that's where the trademark IP comes into play. Versus, I think, trademarking the cultural purpose of what the Trademark Commission was formed for. My suggestion basically probably is, if you're going to compare the two, it would be two totally different type of activity. How do you distinguish this to that, and to say that trademarking the cultural performances and stuff like that versus that of tangible items is really two totally different concepts. So. And again, that's just my suggestion, Senator, is when they formed the commission, honestly, it was basically just to protect the cultural stuff here in the island, because I know they have that in several islands or countries in the Pacific, and I believe Fiji and all the other areas like Australia, they have their own protection guidelines. So it's for that purpose that I think that they formed that commission. And so to combine them, I think it's going to be quite a task. And that's just my take on what I see with the trademarks.
So are you saying that the subcommittee idea of having two separate subcommittees so that they're kind of kept separate might be a good direction?
Yes, Senator, because if when the concept of the trademark, when its first inception, I mean, it didn't bloom as what it's doing now. I mean, I've already recorded over 1,000 or so trademark, although active or inactive. You can see that the interest is there to have these young artistic minds put their items to work, and so they know, and they get so excited and very enthusiastic to want to go out and showcase their new product. Although they label it, like I can say several of them who have used a lot of the Guam language, like Masmai and all that, and then they want to brand their stuff by putting it on shirts, hats, you name it, tangible items, and that's something to be proud of, to know that you're able to come up with local verbiage and add that into your product line and make it not only a learning tool for those visitors who come out here, but to showcase it, and then when they take it back, like I'll give you one example, Fokai. Fokai is a world-known brand already, and it's not only locally, no, I'll take that back. It's not registered locally, but it's registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So there's a difference where the guy who created the Fokai now, I mean, they go out there and now there's states that fall under the Fokai brand, you know. So to put them together, it would be quite a task. And so that's just my take on how I see the trademark program.
That's very good thinking. It's very good background information, and it helps us understand the potential of what we're talking about here. This could be something like Fokai, like some of the others that are out there. When I lived in Australia, there was a fellow from Guam who was making some biking socks, and they were being sold in Australia. So this has national and international implications for our community. So I'm glad you brought those points forward. Is there any other discussion or any other thoughts about subcommittees? And we can continue to think about this. I think if we give ourselves some time and we think about these issues, that serves us better than trying to rush into something on the spot. So if we could continue to think of that, and then maybe next month, excuse me, if next month we can see if we're ready to commit to it and then form ourselves into subcommittees. But again, if we take a few months to do this, I think that's being prudent. We're being very thoughtful, and we're going to be using this time to understand the lay of the land anyway. So there's not necessarily a need to rush into subcommittees. So what I'd like to propose for business for next month, that's being a little too enthusiastic, next week. But for next month is, as I said, to have that in the back of our minds, just to continue to think about how we might best see ourselves as subcommittees, to be hearing some feedback from CAHA on their development of the definitions of the art forms that have been identified thus far, and for me to write a letter to the AG's office asking them to go over the Guam Trademark Act, the Indian Arts and Crafts Act, and then that would mean for us to read those so that we're coming armed with some questions that we can be asking the AG's office. If there's no further discussion?
May I be allowed to ask?
Oh,
Okay.
great.
I have one question after listening to all the discussions here. With the Trademark Commission and the Guam Product Seal involved, what about the cultural producers now? Where would they go? I hear the Guam Product Seal, and I hear that the Guam Product Seal is a very general application. So long as it abides by what they stipulate. The Trademark Commission has not been in effect at all. So meanwhile, the culture producers like myself, what tool do we have in protecting our intellectual rights and the intellectual properties that we are creating right now as we await finalization in these situations? Because there are quite a number of us out there that are producing things. Not only are they iconic, they're original, they're created, and they fit into this category of Guam Product Seal as well as trademark application, but we don't have those tools in place right now. So where do we go?
That's an excellent question. I do know through following your group and other groups that they're very active. They're developing songs, they're developing chants, they're developing dances, and so forth. Mike, do you have any thoughts as to something that they can be doing at this point to protect some of that intellectual property?
One of the things that I've been struggling with when I'm doing the trademark is getting it online actually, and then if they identify it, then they know, and much more stringent penalties, especially when it concerns our local products, our local marks. So the areas of concern where it applies to what he's referring to is one, because we have these mandates, but with the mandates we don't have funds, and I've been trying to get our IT to put that online, but of course that goes with the cost. However, to protect that, I would say more stringent fines and penalties, and also an identified intellectual property attorney that would defend the mark.
I think that's something that we can ask the AG's office when they're here next month. I remember, and I'm not saying that this is actually the answer, but I think I remember being told that even if you just put the C, like a copyright, after it provides a certain amount of protection. But I'm so glad that you raised that, because this work is going to take us a while, and we want to provide some safeguarding as soon as possible. So I definitely will put that on my list for us to be asking the AG or a representative when they show up for our meeting next month. So just Masi. Yes.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always tell people, whoever comes into our office for suggestion and stuff like that, I always tell them, if you have artist's work that you've done, or you have performed at a certain time frame, always cut a newspaper, stand up, take a picture of that, and say at this time So those are identifiable marks that says during that time frame you were performing that, and therefore any contents that is taken out of place without the consent is considered a copyright infringement. So I always tell artists, people who write poetry, write songs, is show some sort of identification, like a newspaper clipping or something like that, and stand next to it and perform the song or perform the dance, and that's proof that was being done prior to them taking portions of your artistry.
I'm well aware of the intangible aspects. You cannot really trademark a dance move because that's very universal all over the world. Left and right, back and front, they're all universal. I was referring to traditional practices that were handed down to members of the cultural houses that exist now, such as extracting the wild hibiscus bark, epoxy. Those are traditional practices, and now we have that knowledge, and we're producing those kind for our uniforms. Those are tangible things that we can trademark, okay? Because that's traditional knowledge that was handed out, and like with the inception of the masters, prior to them departing, we were able to extract a lot of that knowledge, and now we're maintaining it. So even though the cultural houses are known to be just dancers, they are not just dancers. They are the cultural keepers of our people's indigenous identity. So we learned everything, and there's a lot of things from the traditional knowledge that really needs to be protected, trademarked, or they fall under Guam Product Seal, and they fall under trademark too. There's a lot of things. Your picture here in this Indian with the Indian basket. See, those are Indian art forms. Those are traditional knowledge that were handed down, but it's a tangible item, and that can be trademarked. Well, we have the same situation. We have weavers that can weave baskets that were produced, 50, 60 years ago, and those baskets can be trademarked as something indigenous to the Chamorro people.
That's excellent. It's excellent that you're bringing that forward. And that gets to the second trademark, that I think we really do want to be looking at those traditional forms. And I understand what you're saying, though, that work is probably going to be several months away. So There are a couple of things that came to my mind. One is that the United Nations has a register for intangible cultural heritage. And I believe for the Pacific, it's centered out of Fiji. There's a woman who's been working there, you've maybe even met her, who's been working out of Fiji for quite a while. And I can see what we can do for our commission getting a subscription to, they put out some material on a regular basis, I believe. But we could maybe even invite them to come and give us a presentation about how we as a Guam community might be able to tap into what's going on through the United Nations. I mean, we do it, we've been given the allowance to do some of that outside of our territorial status. We can participate in the Olympics and so forth, so we might be able to figure out a way to interact more directly with the United Nations in terms of intangible cultural heritage and some of the other heritage that they take care of. The other thing that came to mind is for our physical items, we have a local register that goes along the same lines as the National Register of Historic Places. We have our own Guam Register of Historic Places. So this is something that the president of the Department of Chamorro Affairs could give us some feedback on. But if we don't have one, we could consider having a register, a local register for traditional art forms. And so, as you're mentioning, there are the baskets, but really it's an intangible cultural heritage, the weaving knowledge, because that's what needs to be safeguarded, because the end product is the basket itself. So, President of DCA, Ms. Anne-Marie, is there a local register like that? Has there been talk of that over the years? Where are we at with that?
No, there isn't one, not out of Department of Chamorro Affairs at least, and I'm not aware of any conversations in the past. Being just coming in the last 6 months, there's no record of any registry. However, I'd like to inform the committee also that there is just as we speak, there's currently a big reorganization for the Department of Chamorro Affairs that's happening. So some of these things might, and I think the direction of where it's going will cultivate these areas where we could have focused look at, something like a registry. So, but as far as I know, there are none. Yeah.
You mentioned something that is very recent, and I did want to bring it to our attention. So for the Department of Chamorro Affairs, there is a reorganization going on, and it's meant to be an opportunity, as the president was saying, to focus and really highlight and strengthen some programs. This will allow the Department of Chamorro Affairs to be able to focus more so on Indigenous rights issues, Indigenous language concerns, and so forth. And so with that, I have a copy of the executive order here that was issued, just a couple of days ago on June 24th, so just a couple of days ago. It's Executive Order 2019-14, and it's relative to the reestablishment of the Guam Public Library System and the Guam Council on the Arts and Humanities Agency, so as being outside of the Department of Chamorro Affairs. So with that, not only for the Department of Chamorro Affairs, but it's going to create opportunity, I think, to look at our public library system. And as we see, even in our public schools, they are reimagining the ways that they can be serving our community. And some of that direction, as I understand it, is that it's opening it up to being a multi-resource community center. And that makes it much more interactive. It makes it much more available to the community in a variety of ways. And so that is one direction that they've gone in. And then the other is for the Council on the Arts and Humanities, for them to perhaps be able to be focusing on ways that they can be strengthening themselves as an agency that serves our artistic and humanities portions of our community, which benefits us all, I would say. And then there's a second part to this, Executive Order 2019-15, relative to creating the Governor's Task Force on Chamorro Heritage and Cultural Advancement to examine the status of the Department of Chamorro Affairs and Guam cultural heritage agencies and develop recommendations to enhance their missions, operations, and effectiveness. So I think those are two movements that will really serve our community well. And it perhaps gives us some of these forums then to take something like an intangible cultural heritage registry and see if that is something that they will now have the capacity to work with. Okay, so that was very good discussion. I'm glad that we had that. Seduas Masi, Frank, for bringing that to our attention and having us discuss that issue. It's a very important one for us to have looked at. Is there anything else we'd like to cover before? Yes, Matt?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention, we've been talking a lot about what we're going to trademark, the products, the intangible things, but we have to keep into the back of our mind who's going to get the trademark at the end of the day. And I think a lot of it's going to be a nonprofit or a sole proprietor manufacturer or a sole proprietor artist or someone that does not have a lot of resources. A lot of the Guam product seal holders are sole proprietors or peddlers. They're very small business. So I think we need to keep in the back of our mind, kind of like what Mr. Unchik said about resources. A lot of them may not have the full resources that are needed to, let's say, get the trademark. They may not have the technical knowledge or the financial resources that may be needed to do some of the things. So I think that's something that the committee needs to keep in the back burner, that we think about that. Because like we see with the Guam product sale, a lot of them are very small. So they don't have much more in the way of, I can make a product and I can afford to get the sale, and they can't move forward from that. So that's something that we need to keep in the back. I don't see at the get-go a lot of big companies coming in saying, I want to get a trademark because I'm going to do these big grandiose things. I have a feeling in the front end it's going to be small groups or nonprofit groups, cultural groups that want to come in and get a trademark. So I think that's something we need to keep in the back of our minds.
That's a very important point that you bring up. And when I had those meetings with the Guam Product Seal, one of the things that they had emphasized was keeping the application very affordable at $25. And so I think that will be key, one of the things that's key in us formulating this, that we're creating a process that's very accessible, that maybe we're creating a process where there's a lot of assistance to it somehow, that we're putting that into the enabling legislation, that there's going to be funding for the mandates if needed, or there are agencies involved that can provide assistance, something that's really going to be helping our community members. So thank you so much, Matt, for bringing that up. That's really important for us to be considering. So if there are no further items, can I hear somebody call for an adjourning?
I'm sorry, can I just
yes.
ask the committee chair, are you entertaining any ideas for next agenda, or how do we?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you have a suggestion for the next agenda?
I mean, is there a process?
We can add it on.
We just send an email to you and recommend any items to be included in the agenda, or?
Sure,
Okay.
that's a good point. So if there's something that comes to mind, especially as you're reading through these items or just interacting with the community or doing your work at hand, if there's something that comes to mind, we can be adding it to the agenda. It's something that we're building up pretty much until just shortly before the meeting, so we can be adding it on. Thank you for bringing that to our attention and making sure that we all have that understanding that you can be adding that in. Is there a call for adjournment?
I move for an adjournment.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries to adjourn this Guam Trademark Commission meeting. And before we run away, I just really want to thank you all so much. You're so thoughtful. You come with such important background. I just am incredibly appreciative for all that you bring with you. The time is now 10:38. Have a good day.